Hi guys, I'm back again with the second part of our image transparency tutorial. And in this part we're going to talk about some advanced ways of using the transparency mask that we saw in the previous one. If you haven't seen that one, I strongly recommend seeing that one before. And also the compatibility with different browsers and devices. So I've composed this HTML which consists only in the image that you see right here with the WebKit mask box image and a very simple div with some generated text and a background color, so we can see that it's delimited by this in this part of the HTML. Okay, well, as we saw earlier, we're composing the image from these two images that we have here. So I'm going to open these two in Photoshop. So this image, which is a JPEG with a black background, plus this transparent PNG, which has no color information, just transparency information, has ended up as an image, as transparent image here. You can see how I'm doing that in my previous tutorial. But you can also use the same style for masking divs, and this is a huge advantage when you're trying to get a specific shape and with a gradient mask. What I mean by a gradient mask, what is the transparency is not just visible and not visible, but it has all the ramp of transparency. So here, if I simply copy this tile right here in the div and I reload the image, as you can see now the image that I've been using earlier is now the mask of the div, and it's actually using all the transparency levels. And just to prove that, I will apply a mask on this image. Alright, and let's say I want it like this, and like so, and like so. This is not ideal by far, but let's say this is what I want to get. And I'm just gonna save it. I'm not gonna save it for web, even though saving for web and devices makes it smaller, but just for the example, I'm not gonna resave it for web and devices. So when I reload, you can see now the guy has a bit of transparency, and this div here has the same transparency, but all the text there inside is live. So you can have very complex text, you can have scrolling, you can have whatever you want that you contain in a div, or nested divs, or absolutely whatever you can put in a div. But afterwards you can use this mask here. And the huge advantage of this is that it works on all browsers except the Chrome browser on Android and the default browser on Android devices. But on that one, it's not breaking the div, or it's not making it invisible. It looks exactly as if it has no mask. So it's not going to destroy your your page layout, but it's not going to be great. Just keep that in mind. If it's really important that it's really nicely visible on an Android device, try to use something else, or put a condition of what image to use, or how the image should be, how the layout should be composed if it's you're on an Android device. It may come as an update in later versions of Android, like KitKat or further, but for now it doesn't work. But for any other any other browser, it works just fine, and you can test it in whatever you want. So just to recap, the code is WebKit mask box image and the URL of the mask. Remember to use single quotes, not double quotes, as those are already used. And put whatever you want in the div. Now, to come back to this image, I was really lucky that the hair is pretty dark and the clothing is pretty dark here. So there wasn't a problem using a black matte when I composed this image. There wasn't an issue with transparency that when I use the really thin hairs, as we can see here in HTML, they compose with a black background and then the opacity kicks in. So we have a pretty decent image here. We don't feel like those are not perfectly black, or this edge, even if it's composed of black pixels, we don't see it as a major issue. We see it as, an acceptable compromise. But sometimes you're gonna get images which you cannot use like that because you can't use the solid matte. And I'm having an example right here. Right? So this lovely image, as you can see, has everything. Has a lot of color, has transparency at different with different levels. This is a bit transparent. This is almost opaque. You got very thin feathering of a shadow here. So there's almost no constant no color that you can use for it. Let's say I'm just gonna simulate using a red matte or some of this red perhaps. Then this edge is gonna be really nice, but all the other edges are gonna be awful. They're not gonna. You're gonna see that the color is gonna be an issue. And just to prove you that, I'm just gonna select this, gonna control and click on it so I get the opacity from it. Create a mask, put both in here, and pretty much we came to the initial image, but as you can see here, it's got a reddish tint. Here it's gonna have a red, kind of reddish glow, and it's not gonna be consistent with the result that we want to get. As you can see here, it's obviously red. If I make this one go fine, the green part, then this part is obviously greenish, and all these colors have a greenish tint. So instead of being like that, it's going to look like this. So there's no way of getting a solid color as a background that I'm having here for your image. The mask is really easy to create, and I'm just gonna create it as I created all the others. Alright, so just apply a color overlay on this, and again I'm using black, so I'm seeing the difference between opaque and not opaque in the best way. And I'm gonna save it for web. It's a PNG 24, 55 kilos. I think that's enough. And I'm gonna save it in transparency here so we can just test it. I'm just gonna call this one C for color. And the JPEG that I'm gonna create, first of all, I'm gonna extract all the transparency from it, so it's gonna be completely opaque. And then I'm gonna save that. And to make sure that all the anti-alias on the edges don't get in the way, I'm gonna feather this a bit and then apply it. Let me show you what I'm gonna do. So first of all, I'm only gonna keep the original layer with no color overlay, no nothing. Then I'm gonna duplicate this one. Alright, now I've got a copy of it. But as you can see, it's already gotten a bit more opaque. But what I want is also these edges and all the feathering to make sure that I'm not gonna cut into a material which is not the correct color. So first I'm gonna apply a bit of blur on it, which is gonna be a Gaussian blur, and it's gonna be 4 pixels. The reason I'm using 4 pixels is that anti-alias is usually made out of 3 pixels. So we've got a completely transparent one, a medium one which creates the edge, and then a fully opaque one. So 4 pixels is a bit more than that. So it should look okay. Now to completely remove the transparency, because you got bits of transparency from almost fully opaque to almost 0 on this feathering. On this feathering, it starts from 1 and ramps up to 100, or 0 to 255 that's going to get saved in the transparent PNG. So to remove it completely, I need to go 100 levels on this one. As you can see, I'm duplicating, merging it, duplicating, merging it. All right, I've done this 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. 128 is more than 100, but it's the first power of 2 that is over 100. But in this way, I'm 100% sure that all the edges that I've got from the original image are gonna have under them a perfect solid background. There's no chance if you multiply transparent image 128 times that you're gonna have something else than 100% opacity. You can either have 0 opacity like we have here, or 100% everywhere else. And that's because if you had 0 opacity, it's gonna become 0 no matter how many times you multiply it. But even if it's 1%, 1% times 128 is over 100, which makes that part completely opaque. So now this way you guarantee that your image is going to be 100% opaque everywhere. So I can just save this for web and devices as a JPEG. And for the matte you can use whatever you want, because that color will not interfere with your image. So you can have it black, white, absolutely however you feel like it's better for you. In this case, black makes the image a bit smaller, so it goes to 21 kilo. Fine, let's have it like that. And this one, call it C. And I just noticed I made an error earlier. This is M. This is mask. It's not C. All right. So now we have the color and the mask together. They are 78 kilos, and the original one was 283. Difference, but it's worth noting because it is much smaller, 4 times smaller, which is acceptable. All right, now let's see how that works in HTML. So here I'm gonna use C. Here I'm gonna use M. I'm gonna reload this. So this is the end result, and you can see the edges of these are nice. You don't see the difference in color. This is yellowish, greenish, and so on. This is nicely darkened, but with the correct hue that it had in Photoshop. And this is the way that you make sure that your edges are very, very well defined, and the colors are exactly like the original colors that the user who created the image initially wanted them to be. If you guys know a better way of just removing the transparency, please feel free to fill it in the comments section. But I found that this is a pretty fast one, just duplicating it. To go to 128 is not that much. You just duplicate and merge until you get there, which is 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, which is just 7 times. You can do it in less than 15 seconds, and you can use Ctrl E or Command E on Apple to merge images. So when you duplicate and then use Command E, there's also a shortcut to duplicate, and you can have it here. But you can also, there are also other methods of doing it with Alt. You just do it like that. Alt, click, paste, merge. It's exactly the same way. And you can ignore all these artifacts that you can see here, because those are going to be 4 pixels away from your original image, so you don't really care about those. Those will never get in your image that you're going to see in the browser. All those pixels are really far away. They are around here, so your mask is not cutting into them. You're only cutting into proper colored pixels. All right.